Melissa always believed she had a pretty good sense of people. After all, she'd been using Tinder for years and had dodged her fair share of strange encounters. So when she matched with a guy named Greg, she didn't think much of it. His profile showed him as a laid-back, outdoorsy type with a love for hiking and dogs. They chatted for weeks, sharing personal stories and favorite playlists, and Melissa felt confident enough to agree to meet him in person. Greg suggested his place, a secluded home he'd recently inherited from his grandmother in a small, quiet town a couple of hours from the city. Melissa hesitated, but reasoned that their long conversations and his openness about his life made him trustworthy. The drive to Greg's house was uneventful. It was late afternoon when Melissa pulled onto the gravel road leading to the house. The property was charming, in a rustic sort of way. A small, two-story house surrounded by dense trees, with a weathered wooden fence and an old tire swing in the yard. But something about it felt off. As Melissa parked her car and stepped out, she felt the hair on her neck stand up. It was probably just the isolation, she told herself. She grabbed her bag, locked her car, and walked to the front door. Greg answered almost immediately, flashing a warm smile. "Hey, you made it," he said, stepping aside to let her in. The house was cozy, with mismatched furniture and a faint smell of wood smoke. Greg offered her a drink, and they sat in the living room, chatting like old friends. Melissa began to relax, enjoying the ease of their conversation. But as they talked, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching them. While Greg went to the kitchen to grab a snack, Melissa glanced around the room. Her eyes were drawn to the large window overlooking the backyard. For a moment, she thought she saw movement outside, a shadow darting past the trees. She stood and walked closer to the window, peering into the gathering dusk. The yard was empty, the swing swaying gently in the breeze. "Everything okay?" Greg's voice startled her, and she turned quickly. "Yeah," she said, forcing a smile. "I just thought I saw something." The evening wore on, and Greg offered to show Melissa the rest of the house. They wandered upstairs, where Greg proudly showed her his grandmother's antique furniture and framed family photos. As they reached the end of the hallway, Melissa noticed a small, locked door. "What's in there?" she asked. Greg hesitated, his smile faltering. "Oh, that's just the attic. Nothing exciting up there. Mostly old junk." Melissa nodded, but the uneasy feeling returned. Later that night, as they sat on the couch watching a movie, Melissa caught herself glancing at the window again. This time, she saw it clearly, a figure standing just outside, partially obscured by the trees. Her breath caught in her throat. "Greg," she whispered, pointing toward the window. "There's someone out there." Greg frowned and stood, walking to the window. He peered outside, then turned back to her. "I don't see anything." Melissa's unease deepened, but she tried to brush it off. Maybe she was imagining things. As the night progressed, Melissa decided to stay the night rather than drive home late. Greg set up a guest room for her, and she thanked him, though she felt reluctant to stay. Around midnight, Melissa woke to a strange sound, a faint tapping, like knuckles rapping against glass. Her heart raced as she sat up, her eyes darting to the window. The figure was back, standing closer this time. It was a man, older than Greg, with gaunt features and hollow eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. Melissa froze, unable to move or look away. The man raised a hand and tapped on the glass again, his lips curling into a twisted smile. She scrambled out of bed and ran to Greg's room, pounding on his door. He opened it groggily, his face creased with confusion. "There's someone outside my window," she said, her voice shaking. Greg grabbed a flashlight and followed her back to the guest room. But when they looked outside, the figure was gone. "You're probably just tired," Greg said, though his tone betrayed a hint of doubt. "Let's check the yard to be sure." They stepped outside into the cold night air, the flashlight beam sweeping across the yard. Melissa stayed close to Greg, her heart pounding with every crunch of gravel underfoot. Near the edge of the yard, they found footprints leading into the woods. The prints were large and deep, as if made by someone heavy. "We should call the police," Melissa said. Greg hesitated, then nodded. While waiting for the police, Melissa stayed inside, her eyes glued to the window. She kept expecting the man to reappear, but the yard remained still. When the officers arrived, they searched the property and surrounding woods but found nothing. "He's probably long gone," one of the officers said. "But if you see anything else, give us a call." Melissa spent the rest of the night on edge, jumping at every sound. By morning, she was eager to leave. Greg apologized for the scare, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. As she drove away, she glanced in her rearview mirror and saw Greg standing on the porch, waving. Behind him, in the upstairs window, the man was back, watching her with that same unsettling smile. Melissa never returned to Greg's house, and though they kept in touch for a while, the relationship fizzled out. She couldn't forget the man in the window, or the sense that she'd narrowly escaped something far more sinister. And late at night, when the wind rattled her windows, she sometimes wondered if the man had followed her home. Jeremy wasn't the type to use dating apps. He always thought they felt impersonal, but after months of pestering from his best friend, he finally gave Tinder a try. To his surprise, he matched with a girl named Hannah within days. Her profile was filled with pictures of her smiling on hikes, reading books, and enjoying her favorite coffee spots. She seemed down-to-earth and genuine, which was rare for him to find. Their conversations flowed naturally. They bonded over shared interests, like their love for 80s horror movies and trying out weird food combinations. When Jeremy found himself in her city for a work trip, Hannah suggested they meet up. She lived in a small college town, and while Jeremy wasn't familiar with the area, he figured it would be a nice way to spend an evening. Hannah proposed meeting at her apartment. "It's quiet here, and we can just hang out," she texted. It sounded casual enough, so Jeremy agreed. The night was cold, the wind sharp as Jeremy followed the GPS to her address. Her apartment was located in a slightly older complex on the edge of town. The building was 3 stories, with pale, peeling paint and dim outdoor lighting. He parked his car in a gravel lot and approached the front door. The complex looked more rundown up close, with cracks in the walls and a faint smell of mildew lingering in the air. Still, he reminded himself that not everyone could afford the fancy high-rises. Hannah buzzed him in, and Jeremy climbed the creaky staircase to her apartment on the 2nd floor. The hallway was narrow, with flickering fluorescent lights overhead. He knocked on her door, and she answered almost immediately. Hannah was just as pretty in person as she was in her photos. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she wore a cozy sweater that made her look approachable. "Hey, glad you found it," she said, stepping aside to let him in. Jeremy entered the apartment and glanced around. It was small but tidy, with a few posters on the walls and a couch covered in colorful throw pillows. A faint smell of lavender filled the air, probably from the candle burning on the coffee table. "You've got a nice place," Jeremy said, trying to make conversation. "Thanks," Hannah replied with a smile. "I don't usually have people over, so it's kind of nice." They sat on the couch and talked for a while, sipping the coffee she'd made. Jeremy started to feel at ease, but something about the apartment felt off. He noticed the door to her bedroom was slightly ajar, and every now and then, he thought he heard faint whispers coming from the other side. "Do you have roommates?" Jeremy asked, glancing toward the door. Hannah shook her head. "Nope, just me." "Why?" "I thought I heard something," he said, laughing nervously. "It's probably just the pipes. This building is old, and the walls are super thin," Hannah said casually, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Jeremy tried to shake the uneasy feeling. They continued chatting, but the whispers grew louder. At first, he thought it was his imagination, but soon, it was impossible to ignore. "Are you sure there's no one else here?" he asked, his voice tense. Hannah's expression faltered for a moment before she laughed. "I swear, it's just us. You're not getting spooked, are you?" Jeremy forced a laugh, but his instincts told him something wasn't right. A loud thud came from the bedroom, making both of them jump. "What was that?" Jeremy asked, standing up. Hannah hesitated. "I'm not sure. Maybe something fell over?" Jeremy took a step toward the bedroom door, but Hannah grabbed his arm. "You don't need to check," she said quickly, her voice shaky. "It's probably nothing." Jeremy pulled away gently. "I just want to make sure." He pushed the door open, his heart pounding. The bedroom was dimly lit, with a single lamp casting long shadows across the walls. The bed was unmade, and clothes were scattered on the floor, but nothing seemed out of place until he saw the closet. The door was slightly open, and inside, he could see several pairs of eyes staring back at him. Jeremy froze, his blood running cold. "Run!" Hannah whispered from behind him. Jeremy didn't need to be told twice. He bolted for the front door, but before he could reach it, several men burst out of the bedroom. They were scruffy, with dirty clothes and wild eyes, and they moved quickly to block his path. One of them brandished a knife, grinning menacingly. "You're not going anywhere," the man growled. Jeremy's mind raced. He grabbed a heavy lamp from the coffee table and swung it at the man, knocking him off balance. The others lunged toward him, but Jeremy managed to shove past them and fling the door open. He sprinted down the hallway, his footsteps echoing as he reached the stairs. Behind him, he could hear the men shouting and cursing, their footsteps pounding on the floor. Jeremy burst out of the building and ran to his car, fumbling with his keys as the men spilled out of the entrance. He jumped into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and started the engine. The men banged on the windows, but Jeremy floored the gas pedal, leaving them behind in a cloud of dust. His hands were shaking as he drove, his mind reeling from what had just happened. He didn't stop until he reached a well-lit gas station miles away. Jeremy called the police and explained everything. When officers arrived at the apartment complex, they found it empty. The men had vanished, and Hannah was gone too. The only trace left behind was a blood-stained knife on the living room floor. Jeremy never heard from Hannah again, but weeks later, he received a text from an unknown number. "Lucky you got away. Not everyone does." He blocked the number and deleted Tinder, vowing never to use it again. But late at night, when he's alone, Jeremy can still hear the whispers, and he'll never forget the eyes staring at him from that dark closet. Megan wasn't sure why she swiped right on Adam, but something about his profile stood out. He wasn't posing shirtless in front of a mirror or holding a fish he'd just caught. Instead, he was smiling naturally, sitting on a hiking trail with the sunset in the background. His bio was simple: nature lover, amateur photographer, and dog dad to Duke. They hit it off quickly, bonding over their shared love of the outdoors and photography. After a few weeks of chatting, Adam invited Megan on a casual hike at a nearby park. It seemed like a safe and fun idea. Public place, fresh air, and no pressure. "Let's meet by the trailhead around 4 p.m., Adam suggested. "It's a short loop, but the view at sunset is incredible." The day of the hike, Megan packed a water bottle, a jacket, and her camera. The park was only a 20-minute drive, and she arrived right on time. The lot was fairly empty except for a couple of cars, including Adam's. He was waiting near the trailhead with his golden retriever, Duke, wagging his tail enthusiastically. "Hey, you made it," Adam said with a warm smile. Duke immediately ran up to Megan, sniffing her shoes and wagging his tail even harder. "Good to meet you, Duke," she said, scratching behind his ears. The hike started off great. The trail wound through tall trees, with dappled sunlight streaming through the leaves. Adam pointed out interesting plants and shared some of his favorite spots for photography. "So, what got you into hiking?" Megan asked. Adam laughed. "Honestly, it's the only thing that keeps Duke from going stir-crazy. Plus, it's the perfect escape from everything." Megan nodded. "I get that. There's something calming about being out here." As they walked, the trail grew narrower, with the trees pressing closer together. The air felt cooler, and the sunlight started to fade. "How much further to the lookout point?" Megan asked. "Not far," Adam replied. "Maybe 10 more minutes." But something about his tone had shifted. It was subtle, but Megan noticed. They rounded a bend, and the trail opened into a small clearing. In the middle stood a large tree with initials carved into its bark. Adam paused, his eyes scanning the area. "This is where the trail splits," he said. "The left path is shorter, but less scenic. The right path takes us to the lookout. Which do you recommend?" Megan asked. Adam hesitated, then nodded toward the right path. "The lookout is worth it." They continued down the right path, but Megan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The forest seemed unnaturally quiet, with no birdsong or rustling leaves. Even Duke, who had been happily sniffing around earlier, now stayed close to Adam's side, his ears perked. "Do you come here often?" Megan asked, trying to make conversation and shake her unease. "Every now and then," Adam said, his voice calm, "but usually not this late." Megan glanced at her phone. It was almost 6 p.m., and the sun was beginning to set. A few minutes later, they reached a narrow wooden bridge crossing a small creek. Adam stopped suddenly, his gaze fixed on something ahead. "What is it?" Megan whispered. Adam raised a finger to his lips, signaling her to stay quiet. At first, Megan didn't see anything, but then, just beyond the bridge, a figure stepped out from behind a tree. The man was tall and disheveled, wearing dirty jeans and a torn jacket. His face was gaunt, and his eyes had a wild, almost animalistic look. He held a large hunting knife in one hand, the blade glinting faintly in the fading light. "Evening," the man said, his voice low and gravelly. Adam stepped in front of Megan, his hand gripping Duke's leash tightly. "We're just passing through," he said calmly. The man smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "No rush. Take your time." Megan's heart pounded as she tried to assess the situation. The man wasn't moving, but the knife in his hand made it clear he wasn't just a harmless stranger. Adam turned his head slightly toward Megan and whispered, "When I say run, take Duke and go back to the clearing. Don't stop." Megan's eyes widened. "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you," Adam said firmly. Before Megan could respond, the man lunged forward. "Run!" Adam shouted, shoving Megan toward the trail. She grabbed Duke's leash and sprinted back the way they'd come, the sound of her heartbeat drowning out everything else. Behind her, she heard a struggle, grunts, footsteps, and the sound of branches snapping. When Megan reached the clearing, she turned and waited, her hands trembling as she clutched Duke's leash. The forest was silent again, and every second felt like an eternity. Finally, Adam emerged from the trail, his shirt torn and a shallow cut on his arm. "Are you okay?" Megan asked, rushing to him. "I'm fine," he said, though his face was pale. "We need to get out of here." They made their way back to the trailhead as quickly as possible, constantly glancing over their shoulders. When they reached the parking lot, they found it empty. Adam pulled out his phone and called the police, reporting the man and the attack. The officers arrived within minutes, combing the trail and surrounding area, but the man was gone. Over the next few days, Megan couldn't stop thinking about the encounter. She kept replaying the moment in her mind, wondering what would have happened if Adam hadn't been there. The police never found the man, though they discovered a small campsite hidden near the creek. Among the items recovered were several knives, a pile of clothing, and a journal filled with disturbing entries about stalking hikers. Megan and Adam kept in touch after the incident, their bond growing stronger as they processed the trauma together. Months later, they returned to the park, not to hike, but to place a warning sign at the trailhead, urging others to stay cautious. And though they moved on with their lives, neither of them ever felt truly safe in the woods again. Late at night, Megan sometimes wakes up to the sound of rustling leaves outside her window, and in those moments, she wonders if the man from the trail ever found someone who didn't get away. Cameron had been swiping aimlessly on Tinder for weeks, not expecting much. Most of his matches led to brief, shallow conversations that fizzled out, but when he matched with Chloe, things felt different. She was bubbly, outgoing, and had a knack for making him laugh. Her profile featured pictures of her hiking, playing with her dog, and laughing with friends. What set Chloe apart, though, was her suggestion for their first date. "I know this great spot just outside of town," she texted. "It's a private field my family owns. Perfect for stargazing and a bonfire." At first, Cameron was hesitant. Meeting in an isolated area with someone he barely knew didn't seem like the safest idea. But Chloe was persuasive, assuring him that it was her family's property and they wouldn't be alone. "My cousin might stop by for a bit," she said casually. Against his better judgment, Cameron agreed. The night of the date was cool and clear, with a full moon casting its glow over the countryside. Chloe had sent Cameron a pin for the location, a remote field about 30 minutes from town. As Cameron drove, the paved roads gave way to gravel and then to a dirt path lined with tall grass. Finally, he spotted a faint glow in the distance, a fire burning in the middle of an open field. When he arrived, Chloe was there, waving at him from beside the bonfire. She wore a denim jacket over a sundress, her blonde hair catching the firelight. "You made it," she said with a smile. Cameron parked his car and stepped out, immediately noticing how quiet it was. The only sounds were the crackling fire and the occasional chirp of crickets. "This place is amazing," he said, glancing around. Chloe beamed. "I'm glad you think so. It's been in my family for years. I come out here to clear my head. It's so peaceful." They sat by the fire, talking and roasting marshmallows. Chloe was easy to talk to, and Cameron found himself relaxing. But as the night went on, he couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. "Do you come out here often?" Cameron asked, trying to keep his voice casual. "Yeah, all the time," Chloe replied. "It's my favorite spot." Cameron glanced over his shoulder, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. He thought he saw movement, a shadow darting between the trees at the edge of the field. "Are you sure no one else is out here?" he asked. Chloe hesitated for a moment before smiling. "Just my cousin, probably. He likes to check in and make sure everything's okay." Cameron nodded, though her answer didn't entirely ease his nerves. A few minutes later, a loud crunching sound came from the direction of the trees. Cameron turned, his heart pounding. "Is that your cousin?" he asked. Chloe stood up, brushing off her dress. "I'll go check. Stay here." Before Cameron could respond, she disappeared into the darkness, leaving him alone by the fire. The fire crackled softly as Cameron waited, his eyes darting between the trees. Minutes passed, but Chloe didn't return. "Chloe!" he called out, his voice echoing in the quiet night. No response. Cameron's unease deepened. He stood and grabbed his phone, using its flashlight to scan the area. "Chloe, are you okay?" As he moved closer to the tree line, Cameron spotted something lying in the grass. It was Chloe's denim jacket. "Chloe!" he shouted, his voice breaking. Before he could move further, a loud engine roared behind him. Cameron spun around to see a van speeding into the field, its headlights cutting through the darkness. The van screeched to a halt near the fire, and two men jumped out, their faces partially obscured by bandanas. "Hey!" Cameron yelled, backing away. "What's going on?" One of the men grinned, pulling out a crowbar. "You're not supposed to be here, buddy." Cameron's stomach dropped as the second man approached him, brandishing a length of rope. He turned and bolted toward the trees, adrenaline pumping through his veins. Behind him, he could hear the men shouting and the sound of their heavy boots pounding on the ground. Cameron ran deeper into the woods, his flashlight bouncing wildly. His lungs burned, and his heart felt like it might burst from his chest. He tripped over a root and fell hard, his phone skidding out of his hand. Scrambling to his feet, he grabbed the phone and turned off the flashlight, crouching behind a large tree. The men's voices grew louder as they closed in. "He couldn't have gone far," one of them shouted. Cameron held his breath, his back pressed against the tree. The sound of footsteps passed dangerously close, then began to fade. He waited until he was sure the men were gone before creeping further into the woods. As he moved, he noticed a faint glow ahead. At first, he thought it might be another fire, but as he got closer, he realized it was a row of lights strung between trees. Beneath the lights was a makeshift campsite, complete with folding chairs, a table, and a cooler. Cameron's relief was short-lived. As he stepped into the clearing, he saw what was on the table: a roll of duct tape, zip ties, and a hunting knife. His stomach churned. This wasn't just a campsite, it was a trap. He turned to leave, but a voice stopped him in his tracks. "Going somewhere?" Cameron spun around to see Chloe standing at the edge of the clearing, her cheerful demeanor replaced with a cold, calculating expression. "You're in on this?" he asked, his voice trembling. Chloe shrugged. "It's nothing personal. You seem like a nice guy, but, well, nice guys are easy targets." Behind her, the two men emerged from the trees, their grins sending a chill down Cameron's spine. Cameron's mind raced. He glanced around the clearing, desperate for a way out. His eyes landed on the cooler, and an idea formed. Before anyone could react, he grabbed the cooler and hurled it at the men, knocking one of them to the ground. He bolted into the woods, ignoring the shouts and footsteps behind him. His only goal was to reach his car. When he finally broke through the tree line, he saw his car up ahead. The van was gone, likely sent after him. Cameron dove into the driver's seat and started the engine, peeling out of the field and onto the dirt road. He didn't stop until he reached a gas station miles away, where he called the police. Officers investigated the field but found no trace of Chloe or the men. The campsite had been dismantled, leaving nothing but scorched grass where the fire had been. Cameron deleted Tinder that same night. He never heard from Chloe again, but he couldn't shake the feeling that she and her accomplices were still out there, luring unsuspecting people into their traps. And sometimes, late at night, he'd wake up in a cold sweat, certain he'd heard her voice whispering his name. Jessica had always been cautious when it came to online dating. After hearing horror stories about catfishes and bad experiences, she'd established strict rules for herself. Meet in public places, always tell a friend where she was going, and never drink too much. When she matched with Marcus on Tinder, she felt cautiously optimistic. He seemed polite, funny, and well-spoken, and their conversations quickly grew engaging. They shared a love for cooking and classic movies, and he seemed genuinely interested in getting to know her. By the time Marcus suggested they meet in person, Jessica felt comfortable enough to accept. He proposed a cozy dinner at his house. "I'd love to cook for you," he said. "Just a simple meal, nothing fancy. My kitchen's my pride and joy." Jessica hesitated. Meeting someone at their house on a first date went against her rules. But Marcus's warmth and the idea of a home-cooked meal won her over. She told herself she'd stay alert and trust her instincts. The evening of their date, Marcus texted her his address, which was in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Jessica shared the location with her best friend, Emma, just in case. When she arrived, Marcus greeted her at the door with a broad smile. He was even more charming in person, dressed in a casual button-up shirt and jeans. The house was immaculate, with modern decor and the faint aroma of garlic and herbs wafting from the kitchen. "I hope you're hungry," Marcus said as he led her inside. The dining table was beautifully set, complete with candles and a bottle of red wine. Jessica felt her nerves ease slightly as they sat down to eat. "You really went all out," she said, impressed. Marcus chuckled. "I just wanted to make it special." They ate and chatted, the conversation flowing as easily as the wine. Marcus poured her a glass, and though Jessica wasn't much of a drinker, she took a few sips to be polite. Halfway through the meal, Jessica began to feel strange. Her head felt heavy, and her vision blurred slightly. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked, his voice laced with concern. Jessica tried to focus on him, but her thoughts were sluggish. "I think I need some water," she managed to say. Marcus nodded and stood, walking to the kitchen. Jessica's heart pounded as she struggled to stay alert. Something wasn't right. When Marcus returned with the water, Jessica forced a smile and took a small sip, trying to buy herself time. Her instinct screamed at her to leave, but her body felt weak and uncooperative. "I think I need to lie down for a minute," she said, hoping to find a way to escape. Marcus's expression darkened for a split second before he quickly recovered. "Of course," he said. "The couch is right there." Jessica stood slowly, gripping the edge of the table for support. As she moved toward the couch, she discreetly grabbed her phone from her bag. While Marcus was distracted clearing the table, Jessica stumbled into the bathroom and locked the door. Her hands trembled as she dialed Emma's number. "Jessica? What's wrong?" Emma's voice was sharp with worry. I think he drugged me," Jessica whispered, her voice shaking. Emma didn't hesitate. "Call the police. I'm on my way." Jessica ended the call and dialed 911, giving the dispatcher Marcus's address. Minutes felt like hours as Jessica sat on the bathroom floor, her back pressed against the door. She heard Marcus knocking softly. "Jessica? Are you okay? You've been in there a while." "I'm fine," she called back, trying to keep her voice steady. "Come on out." "Let me help you," he said, his tone dripping with false concern. Jessica stayed silent, her pulse racing. The sound of sirens in the distance was the sweetest relief Jessica had ever felt. Moments later, she heard the police pounding on the front door. "Police, open up." Jessica unlocked the bathroom door and stumbled into the hallway just as officers entered the house. Marcus's face turned pale as they approached him. "Is everything okay here?" one of the officers asked, glancing between Jessica and Marcus. Jessica pointed at him, her voice weak but firm. "He drugged me." The officers restrained Marcus and began searching the house while paramedics tended to Jessica. In the living room, they found a second bottle of wine. This one unopened, but with a faint chemical smell when uncorked. In the kitchen, they discovered a small vial of clear liquid hidden in a drawer. "It's a sedative," one of the officers told Jessica later. "A strong one." Jessica was taken to the hospital, where tests confirmed she had been drugged. The police questioned Marcus extensively, but he claimed innocence, insisting it was a misunderstanding. However, a deeper investigation into his past revealed a disturbing pattern. Marcus had been linked to several similar incidents, though none had escalated to physical harm. Jessica's quick thinking and decision to call for help likely saved her from a far worse fate. In the weeks that followed, Jessica struggled to process what had happened. She deleted Tinder and distanced herself from online dating entirely. But the experience left her with lingering paranoia. She found herself double-checking locks, avoiding strangers, and feeling uneasy around overly friendly people. And sometimes, late at night, she'd wake up from nightmares. Marcus's face twisted into a sinister grin as he poured her another glass of wine. Though she'd survived the encounter, the memory of that night remained a shadow she couldn't quite escape.